The twin sons of Tatooine had witnessed a great many things in their long, burning lives. They had watched the Tusken Raiders stalk the Dune Sea for generations. They had baked moisture farmers into leathery resignation. They had sat behind the horizon while a young man dreamed of somewhere else, somewhere that mattered. But neither son, in all their ancient indifference, had ever watched something fall from the stars the way it happened on this particular afternoon. Not like a ship losing power, not like a meteor caught in gravity's slow pull, but like something thrown. Something launched with casual, terrifying intention, as though the universe itself had simply flicked a pebble and didn't bother watching where it landed. The impact crater was 40 meters wide and 9 meters deep. At its center, completely unharmed, sat Saitama. He was brushing sand off his cape when the first Jawa found him. The small scavenger froze at the crater's rim, enormous amber eyes blinking behind its dark goggles, head tilted at the bald man sitting cross-legged in the smoking glass-lined pit like he was waiting for a delayed transit shuttle. Saitama looked up. The Jawa made a sound, somewhere between a squeak and a theological crisis, and bolted. "Huh," Saitama said, looking around at the vast orange desert stretching in every direction beneath two suns that felt completely wrong. "Where is this?" He climbed out of the crater without urgency, brushed the remaining sand from his yellow suit and looked at the horizon. No convenience stores, no apartment buildings, no sign of a monster attack or dimensional disturbance he could report to the Hero Association. Just sand, wind, and two suns that were already giving him what he suspected was going to be a spectacular double shadow sunburn situation. He patted his head. Still bald. At least that was consistent. The dimensional rift had closed behind him somewhere between Jupiter and wherever this was. He'd been doing his usual training, 10,000 jumps, 10,000 squats, the usual, when something had simply opened in front of him during jump number 6003. He'd gone through it the way he went through most things, without enough information to be appropriately concerned and without enough threat to be appropriately alert. He'd patch it, find his way back. He always did. He started walking toward what looked like a settlement on the horizon. The Imperial garrison at Anchorhead was a modest installation. 24 stormtroopers, a pair of ATSDs, one overpromoted lieutenant named Callow who had been stationed here as punishment for contradicting a Moff at dinner. It was, by Imperial standards, the definition of an assignment you didn't come back from with promotions. Nothing happened on Tatooine. The Hutts kept order of a sort. The locals were beaten down and compliant. The most exciting thing Lieutenant Callow had experienced in 8 months was a particularly aggressive womp rat in the supply depot. Then the crater report came in. "Unknown impact event, Dune Sea, Sector 7, the comm officer read, voice utterly flat. "No debris field consistent with meteoric origin, no ship signature, no radiation, just a hole." Callow looked at the report with the expression of a man who desperately didn't want it to be interesting. "Send a scout unit. Standard procedure." The scout unit, 4 speeder bikes and a ground transport, reached the crater in 20 minutes. Their report came back in 45 seconds. "A man is walking away from it, sir." A man. Bald yellow suit, walking north toward Anchorhead, doesn't appear to have any transportation, doesn't appear concerned. Callow closed his eyes. "Stop him, ask for identification, standard." "We tried that, sir," he said, and I'm quoting directly, "I don't have ID, I'm not from here, and I'm kind of hungry, do you have any food?" We attempted to detain him and a pause that contained multitudes. "He caught a blaster bolt, sir, with his hand. Then he looked at it like it was a bug he'd caught and set it down on the ground, carefully." Callow sat very still for a moment. "Pull the unit back," he said quietly. "Get me a direct line to the regional commander, and someone get me the bounty hunter frequency." Saitama had not intended to destroy anything at Anchorhead. He wanted to make that clear to himself at least, because there wasn't anyone else around to make it clear to at the moment. He'd walked into the garrison looking for food and directions. The stormtroopers had pointed weapons at him. And then everything had happened very quickly in the way things tended to when people pointed weapons at Saitama. No one was dead. He was careful about that now, had been for years, since he'd learned the hard way that his version of a warning tap registered as a structural demolition event on everything in the known universe. The 16 stormtroopers were alive, unconscious, and scattered across approximately 3 city blocks in various states of armor fragmentation. Both ATSDs were neatly tipped onto their sides. Saitama had done it gently, by his standards. He'd found a ration bar in the commissary. It tasted like compressed sadness and synthetic grain. He ate 3 of them standing in the ruins of the mess hall, reading an Imperial propaganda poster on the cracked wall with mild curiosity. He studied the severe-looking man in the black armor on the poster. Looked important, looked mean. Saitama had met a lot of important, mean-looking people. Usually, they were the ones who thought they were the final boss. He pocketed 2 more ration bars for the road. By the time he walked out of Anchorhead's shattered south gate, heading toward the larger settlement he'd been told was called Mos Eisley, told by a stormtrooper he'd propped against a wall and politely asked for directions before the man fainted. He had been in this galaxy for approximately 4 hours. He had already destroyed an Imperial military installation, been added to a bounty network under the descriptor, extremely dangerous, do not engage without overwhelming force, and generated a priority communication up the Imperial chain of command that would, within 18 hours, reach the personal attention of a regional MOF who would read it 3 times with increasing disbelief, before forwarding it upward with a note that simply read, "I don't know what this is." Saitama walked through the desert under the double suns, thought about whether he'd left his stove on back in his apartment in City Z, and decided he probably hadn't. He was, if he was being completely honest with himself, a little bored. Mos Eisley smelled like engine grease, alien spices, and the specific desperation of people who had run out of better options. Saitama found it moderately interesting. The cantina, especially the noise, the music with its strange syncopated rhythm, the sheer variety of species crammed elbow to tentacle around sticky tables, was the most stimulating thing he'd encountered since arriving. He sat at the bar and asked for something hot. The Wookiee bartender, a concept Saitama accepted without comment because he had fought things considerably stranger, set a steaming bowl in front of him. He didn't have credits. He explained this honestly. The bartender's expression suggested this was not the first time today someone had tried this. What the bartender had not experienced before was a customer placing one finger on the bar top and pressing gently until the Durasteel buckled inward like wet clay, and then saying with complete sincerity, "I'm not trying to threaten you. I'm just showing you that I could destroy the building if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I just want the soup. I'll figure out how to pay you back somehow. I'm pretty good at exterminating things if you have a pest problem." The bartender gave him the soup for free. Saitama ate it slowly, listening to the conversations around him. Fragments assembled themselves into a picture he didn't fully understand but could roughly sketch. There was an empire, it was bad, people were fighting it, they were losing, and everyone in this cantina existed in the space between those 2 facts, trying not to get crushed. He recognized the shape of it. Bullies with power, regular people suffering, not enough heroes doing anything about it. He'd seen that before. He ordered a second bowl and thought about it without urgency, because urgency was a feeling that required the possibility of being too late, and Saitama had never truly learned to feel that particular flavor of fear. Somewhere above the planet, an Imperial Star Destroyer had just dropped out of hyperspace. Its orders were simple: locate the anomaly, assess the threat level, and eliminate it with whatever force was deemed necessary. Its commander had no idea that whatever force was deemed necessary did not exist in any Imperial inventory. The Star Destroyer inexorable hung above Tatooine like a gray iron tombstone, its shadow falling across the planet's upper atmosphere in a declaration that needed no translation. Admiral Herrick was a precise man, precise in his dress, precise in his speech, precise in the methodical way he had climbed the Imperial ladder by never making the kind of mistakes that drew attention from above. He had survived the purges, the reorganizations, the endless political knife fights of Imperial command by being the kind of officer who solved problems before they became embarrassing. He read the Anchorhead report 3 times, studied the sensor data twice, and then did something he rarely did. He called every bounty hunter currently operating in the Outer Rim and told them the same thing. One target, bald yellow suit, Tatooine, 10,000 credits alive, 20,000 dead. By morning, the number had been revised. 50,000, dead only. Alive was no longer considered a realistic category. Saitama woke up on the roof of the cantina because the owner had asked him to leave after his 3rd bowl, and he hadn't found anywhere else that was immediately appealing. He'd slept in worse places. The roof of his apartment building during the summer heat waves back home, a collapsed building during the giant Centipede King incident of 2 years ago. The double suns rose with a kind of theatrical excess he appreciated. Back home, sunrise was just sunrise. Here, it felt like the planet was trying to impress someone. He dropped off the roof, landed without a sound despite the 3-story fall, and walked into the morning market of Mos Eisley looking for breakfast. He found instead 6 bounty hunters. They had arranged themselves with professional care, 2 on rooftops, 1 in a doorway, 1 behind a market stall, and 2 directly in his path, which Saitama thought showed a certain confidence he could respect even if it was somewhat misplaced. The 2 in front were an armored Mandalorian and a reptilian creature in a flight suit that bristled with weapons the way some people bristle with anxiety, reflexively, comprehensively, as a default state of being. The Mandalorian spoke first. "You're the one they're calling the bald meteor." Saitama touched his head. "I've had worse nicknames." "There's a 50,000 credit bounty on your head. Imperial contract. We're professionals. We don't want this to get complicated." Saitama looked at the 2 of them, then glanced up at the rooftops where he could see the faint glint of rifle scopes because he had excellent eyes and the hunters weren't quite as concealed as they believed. He looked back at the Mandalorian. "I don't want it to get complicated either. I'm actually looking for breakfast. Do you know if there's anywhere around here that does something hot that isn't out of a packet?" The reptilian hunter fired first. They always fired first. Saitama had noticed this was a universal constant across all dimensions, galaxies, and threat levels. Someone always fired first, and it was never him, and it never mattered. He didn't dodge. He didn't need to. The blaster bolt hit him in the chest and died there, absorbed into his suit like a complaint absorbed by a bureaucracy, acknowledged, processed, entirely without consequence. He looked down at the faint scorch mark on his yellow chest, frowned slightly. He'd only just gotten the last burn mark out. What followed was not a fight in any meaningful sense of the word. It was closer to the weather. The 6 hunters operated with genuine skill, coordinated firing patterns, flashbang charges, a sonic disruptor that the rooftop hunter deployed with excellent timing, and a net launcher that the Mandalorian triggered at precisely the right moment. Any one of these tactics would have neutralized a normal target. The net wrapped around Saitama perfectly. He looked at it, looked at the Mandalorian, and then flexed, gently, the way you might stretch after a long sleep. And the net, reinforced carbonite weave rated for a rancor, came apart like wet paper. He did not punch any of them. He'd learned in Anchorhead that punching tended to produce structural consequences that inconvenienced bystanders. Instead he moved, not at full speed, because full speed would have created a shockwave that leveled the market, but fast enough that by the time any of the 6 hunters consciously registered his position, he had already removed their weapons, deposited 4 of them in a neat seated row against a market stall, and was holding the Mandalorian's rifle in one hand and looking at it with the specific curiosity of someone who has never seen this particular design before. "This is interesting," he said, turning it over. How does the power cell work? The Mandalorian stared at him through the visor with an expression that, while hidden, clearly contained a significant revision of worldview. "You're not going to kill us," the reptilian hunter said slowly. It wasn't quite a question. "No," Saitama said. He set the rifle down carefully. "I don't really do that unless there's a very good reason. Do any of you know someone who could explain how this galaxy works? I'm a bit lost." The Mandalorian's name was Drevin Cast, and he had been a bounty hunter for 11 years, which meant he had survived long enough to develop the particular pragmatism that came with understanding that some situations required complete reassessment rather than escalation. He sat across from Saitama in a back booth of the cantina. The owner sighed deeply upon seeing them return, and talked for 2 hours because the alternative was incomprehensible, and he was experienced enough to recognize that incomprehensible situations were best navigated through information rather than violence. He explained the Empire, the rebellion, the fall of the Republic, the Jedi, nearly extinct, hunted by things called Inquisitors, the few survivors scattered across the galaxy in hiding. The Force. Saitama listened to this part with the expression of a man being told something he probably should find surprising but couldn't quite manufacture the appropriate reaction for. He'd met psychics. He'd fought beings of pure energy. A mystical field that connected all living things ranked, in his personal taxonomy of unusual phenomena, somewhere around moderately interesting. "So this Empire," Saitama said, wrapping both hands around a hot drink Drevin had ordered for him. "They just control everything, and everyone's okay with that." "Not everyone. The rebellion fights them." "Are they winning?" Drevin's expression answered the question before his words did. "They survive." Saitama nodded slowly, looking at the table. He recognized that too. Heroes who survived rather than won, who held on rather than triumphed, who kept fighting not because victory felt achievable but because stopping felt worse. He'd spent years being that kind of hero in the gaps between his own boredom, going through the motions of a system that treated heroism as a career rather than a calling. "Why do you work for the Empire?" he asked Drevin. "I don't work for the Empire, I work for credits. The Empire has credits." "Doesn't bother you what they do?" Drevin was quiet for a moment. Outside, the market was resuming its noise, the daily performance of normal life reasserting itself over the disruption Saitama had caused, the way water fills whatever shape it's poured into. "I stopped letting things bother me that I couldn't change," Drevin said finally. Saitama looked at him with eyes that were, for a moment, not particularly vacant or bored but something more specific, the expression of someone who understood that answer completely and had made a different peace with it. "I used to think that," he said. "Then I found out I could change pretty much anything physically, and I still felt the same way. So I'm not sure stopping things from bothering you is actually the answer." Drevin had no response to that. His communicator went off. He looked at it. His eyes went carefully neutral in the way of a man receiving very bad news in front of someone he's not sure is an enemy. "What is it?" Saitama asked. "The bounty on you just went up again." Drevin set the communicator on the table so Saitama could see the number. 200,000. They're also sending a fleet element to Tatooine. And he paused. "There's a secondary note. Vader is being dispatched to personally assess." Saitama looked at the number, then at the name. "Vader," he repeated, the way you repeat a word in a foreign language to check your pronunciation. "Is that the one on the poster? Black armor, scary mask." "The same." Saitama picked up his drink, took a long sip, set it down. "Okay," he said, without particular alarm or excitement, which Drevin found more unsettling than either would have been. High above the planet, the message reached the Executor, Vader's personal superstar destroyer, while the Dark Lord stood before the viewport in his meditation chamber, breathing in the slow, mechanical rhythm that sustained him. His aide delivered the Tatooine report with the carefully controlled terror of a man handing a live thermal detonator to his employer. Vader read it once. He reached out through the Force toward Tatooine, the way you might extend a hand into a dark room to find the light switch. Every living thing in the Force had a signature, warmth or cold, or the particular texture of midi-chlorian connection. He could feel the bounty hunters, the settlers, the crawling desert life. He could feel the absence of a Force signature where the reports indicated this entity stood, not a void, not a blank spot, but something stranger. Something the Force simply didn't know what to do with. For the first time in years, Darth Vader felt something adjacent to curiosity. He closed his meditation chamber. "Set course for Tatooine," he told his captain, "and tell the fleet to maintain position. I will handle this personally." His captain wisely did not point out that this was exactly what the last 3 admirals had told the regional MUF, before revising their estimates significantly upward. Saitama finished his drink, thanked the bartender, and walked out into the Tatooine morning to wait, without urgency, for whatever came next. He was still a little hungry. Darth Vader descended from the shuttle ramp at Mos Eisley's Imperial landing pad like a sentence that ended every conversation in the room. The stormtrooper escort was unnecessary. It always was, but the Empire understood theater the way it understood everything else. As an instrument of control, a reminder that the machine was larger than any individual within it. Boots on the Durasteel platform, black cloak settling, the rhythmic mechanical breathing cutting through the desert heat like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. Citizens scattered. Traders found urgent business elsewhere. The cantina, which had already had a complicated morning, emptied with impressive speed. Saitama was sitting on a crate outside it, eating something on a stick he'd traded 2 Imperial ration bars for, watching the procession with the mild interest of a man observing a moderately unusual weather event. Vader stopped 10 meters away. The Force moved around him the way air moves around a large, fast object, displaced, pressured, carrying the weight of decades of violence and the specific cold gravity of the dark side. Every Force-sensitive being within 2 kilometers felt it as a physical thing, a drop in spiritual temperature, a reminder that the galaxy had teeth, and this was what they looked like. Saitama finished his food on a stick. "You're Vader," he said, not a question. The poster had been accurate. The breathing continued its steady rhythm. Vader was reaching through the Force with the precision of a surgeon, probing, assessing, mapping the signature of what stood before him, and finding, for the first time in his experience, nothing that the Force could adequately categorize. Not darkness, not light, not absence. Something outside the filing system entirely, like a color that had no name in any language currently spoken in the galaxy. "You have caused considerable disruption," Vader said. His voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had never needed to raise it. "I didn't mean to," Saitama said, which was true. "The garrison came at me first. I was careful. 16 stormtroopers, 2 ATSDs, an entire installation. Nobody died." A pause, the breathing. "That is, I am told, the unusual part." Saitama stood up from the crate, brushing crumbs off his suit, and Vader watched him with every sense available: eyes, force, the tactical calculation of a warrior who had not survived this long by underestimating opponents. The man was short, unremarkable in every visual dimension. No weapon, no armor. No tension in his posture, which was the detail that registered most specifically, because every living thing that stood before Darth Vader carried tension in their body, the biological fact of fear, the nervous system's acknowledgement that it was in the presence of death. This man stood the way people stood in lines at shops, relaxed to the point of mild inconvenience. "I'm going to offer you one opportunity," Vader said. "Come with me. Your abilities are of interest to the Emperor. You will be studied, assessed, and if you prove useful, you will be given purpose within the Empire." Saitama considered this with genuine seriousness, which Vader found briefly unexpected. Most people either agreed out of terror or refused out of defiance. This man appeared to be actually weighing it. "What kind of purpose?" Saitama asked. "Whatever your capabilities warrant." "Would I have to follow orders from people I disagree with?" "You would serve the Empire." "That's not really an answer." Saitama scratched the back of his head. "I've had a job before, hero for hire basically. I know what it's like when the organization you work for doesn't actually care about the thing you're supposed to be doing. This empire, from what I've heard, doesn't actually care about the people it says it's protecting. So that bothers me. I'd be bad at ignoring it." Vader regarded him. "You are refusing." "I'm explaining why I'm refusing. There's a difference." What happened next was something that would be whispered about in the cantinas of a dozen Outer Rim systems for years, embellished with each retelling, the details shifting and growing, but the core of it remaining consistent because the witnesses who watched from doorways and shuttered windows could not agree on much except the essential fact of it. Vader moved. Not the measured, deliberate movement of an Imperial commander making a point, but the full committed violence of a warrior who had decided that conversation was finished. The lightsaber came to life, red, humming with a sound like a sustained threat, the cracked kyber crystal's unstable pitch cutting through the desert air, and Vader crossed the distance between them in a single motion that combined decades of combat mastery with the Force's amplification of human speed into something that should have been, by any reasonable measure, impossible to respond to. Saitama leaned slightly to the left. The blade passed through the space where his head had been and carved a burning line through the wall of the cantina behind him. Vader recovered immediately, years of reflexive mastery redirecting the strike into a follow-through that became a second attack, then a third, combinations that had dismembered Jedi Knights, had ended generals and warriors and monsters, each strike precisely placed to eliminate any avenue of response. Saitama moved through all of them the way water moves through fingers, not with the Force-enhanced speed of a Jedi, not with any technique that Vader's battle-trained perception could classify and counter, but with something simpler and more absolute, the reflexes of a man whose training had pushed his body past every ceiling that biology acknowledged, again and again, until the ceiling stopped existing. He wasn't predicting Vader's attacks. He wasn't reading the Force signature of incoming strikes. He was simply fast enough that the attacks, regardless of their origin, arrived somewhere he wasn't. Vader paused, the breathing, the red blade is humming. He reached out with the Force and pushed. The telekinetic wave that had crushed starfighters, had thrown beings across rooms, had compressed the air itself into a weapon. It hit Saitama like wind hits a mountain. He rocked back half a step, blinked, looked mildly surprised, the way you look when a door opens toward you instead of away. "Huh," Saitama said. "That's a new one, do that again." Vader did, harder, the Force compressing, focusing, a concentrated point of telekinetic pressure that should have shattered bones and ruptured organs. Saitama planted his feet and leaned into it, squinting slightly, the way you squint into a strong wind. His cape snapped. The ground around him cracked in a rough circle from the pressure displacement. The crate behind him became briefly airborne. He was unharmed. Vader had not encountered this. He had encountered Force nullifiers, beings and technology that blocked or absorbed Force abilities. This was different. The Force worked. It reached Saitama. It simply failed to matter. Saitama rolled his shoulder. That actually felt like something. Most things don't. He looked at Vader with an expression that was not threatening, not triumphant, but something Vader's long experience with opponents could only catalog as genuine interest, the expression of someone who had found, briefly, something worth paying attention to. "You're strong. You're the strongest thing I've met since I got here." He said it without mockery, as an honest assessment. "But," Vader said, because 40 years of combat experience recognized that particular sentence had a second half. "But you're still not close." Saitama said it the way you say things that make you a little sad. Nobody ever is. Vader attacked again, this time without restraint, the full application of what he was. Former Chosen One, vessel of both sides of the Force, warrior remade by fire and loss and mechanical reconstruction into something beyond the human he'd started as. The lightsaber traced patterns in the air that glowed in the retinas of the watching survivors, burning afterimages of a master at absolute commitment. Force-enhanced strength behind each strike, Force prediction reading probability lines of Saitama's movement, and adjusting, the full terrible machinery of Darth Vader in genuine combat brought to bear on a single target. Saitama blocked the next strike with his forearm. The lightsaber stopped, did not pass through, did not burn. The plasma blade, which cut through blast doors and starship hulls, which had never in its activation met something it could not eventually sever, pressed against the yellow-sleeved forearm of a bald man from another dimension and held there, crackling, going nowhere. Vader stared at his blade, then at the arm, then through the mask at Saitama. "I told you," Saitama said quietly. He wasn't gloating. If anything, he looked tired in a specific way, the tiredness of someone who has had this same conversation with the universe too many times. "You're strong, really. By everything I've seen here, you're probably the strongest thing in this galaxy." He gently pushed the lightsaber aside with one finger, the way you redirect a child's toy. "I've been looking for someone who could actually fight me for 3 years. I thought maybe in a different galaxy." He looked at Vader directly. "I'm sorry, you're not it either." The apology was sincere. That was the part Vader had no framework for. He disengaged, stepped back. The red blade extinguished. His breathing filled the silence. Something was calculating behind the mask, not defeat, because Vader did not process events through categories like defeat, but reassessment, the tactical mind taking in new information and rebuilding its model of reality around it. "What are you?" he asked. The question was quieter than anything he'd said before, stripped of performance. Saitama thought about it. "A hero," he said. "For fun, mostly. I'm kind of between problems right now." He paused. "Also, I'm still a bit lost. Is there anyone in this galaxy who could point me toward the people who are actually trying to do something good? Not for an organization, just actually trying." Vader looked at him for a long moment. The Force swirled around the Dark Lord in configurations that, had any Jedi been present to read them, would have been deeply confusing, not darkness surging, not the cold certainty of the Sith, but something older and quieter moving beneath the surface. The echo of a man who had once asked a very similar question and received a very different answer. He did not respond. He turned, cloak moving with the gravity of a closing statement, and walked back toward his shuttle with the measured pace of someone who needed time to think without appearing to need it. He did not order Saitama's arrest. He did not order an airstrike. He simply left, and the stormtroopers, reading the situation with the survival instinct of men who had watched colleagues get force-choked for lesser failures of judgment, left with him. Drevin Cast appeared from a doorway where he'd been watching. He looked at Saitama. He looked at the retreating Imperial column. He looked at the lightsaber-shaped scorch mark in the cantina wall, the cracked durasteel ground, and the crate that had become shrapnel. "You pushed his lightsaber away," Drevin said, "with one finger." "I didn't want to break it," Saitama said. "It seemed important to him." Drevin sat down on a piece of the destroyed crate and was quiet for a while. Then, "The people who are actually trying to do something good," he said slowly, "the way you say something you've been trying not to say for a while. I know how to find them. I've been avoiding doing business with them because they don't pay well. Would you take me to them?" Drevin looked at the scorch mark, at the cracked ground, at the man who had just survived Darth Vader's full and genuine effort and was now standing in the Tatooine morning, looking vaguely hopeful about the prospect of meeting people with good intentions. "Yeah," Drevin said, with the resignation of someone whose worldview was being rearranged against his preference. "I think maybe I will." The Rebel Alliance's medical frigate Mercy's edge was running dark. No transponder signal, minimal power output, drifting in the gravitational shadow of a gas giant in the outer rim like a held breath. It was the kind of hiding that required discipline and desperation in equal measure, the kind that wore on people over weeks and months until the silence itself became a pressure. 43 Rebel personnel lived in that silence, mechanics, medics, 2 pilots whose X-wings were docked in the cramped hangar with their deflector shields powered down to reduce the energy signature, and a Mon Calamari intelligence officer named Rill, who had been running on 4 hours of sleep per night for 6 weeks and had stopped noticing. Rill was the one who received Dreven's transmission. He listened to it twice, forwarded it to Commander Sira Odin with a note that read simply, "You need to hear this," and then sat quietly for a moment with the expression of someone who had just been handed information they didn't know how to file. Commander Odin was a human woman in her late 30s with the particular quality of stillness that came from years of making decisions where the wrong one got people killed. She had short-cropped gray-streaked hair, a scar along her jaw from the Battle of Atollan, and a habit of making direct eye contact that most Imperials found unsettling and most Rebels found reassuring. She listened to Dreven's transmission once, asked 2 questions, and Vader engaged him directly, and he's unharmed. And then was quiet for 11 seconds, which her crew had learned to recognize as the period during which she converted an impossible situation into a plan. "Bring them in," she said. Saitama had never been in hyperspace before. He sat in the jump seat behind Dreven in the Mandalorian's battered ship, a Comet-class fighter that had seen better decades, but ran with the reliability of something maintained by someone who understood that their life depended on it, and watched the stars stretch into blue-white lines with the genuine, unguarded wonder of a man experiencing something new. New things were rare for Saitama. He pressed his face slightly closer to the viewport, then was strictly dignified. "This is actually pretty cool," he said. Dreven glanced back at him. In the hours since Mos Eisley, the bounty hunter had been performing the quiet recalibration of a man who had decided to make a significant professional pivot and was working out the practical details. The Imperial contract on Saitama was still active. He was technically transporting the target away from Imperial space rather than toward it. This was, by any definition, the opposite of his job. He found he didn't particularly care, which itself was new information about himself. "The frigate will be suspicious of me," Dreven said. "I've done bounty work in Rebel-adjacent space before, not against them directly, but—" "I'll explain," Saitama said, still looking at hyperspace. "You don't know enough about this galaxy to explain anything convincingly." "I'll explain that I don't know enough about this galaxy. That's usually more convincing than pretending." Dreven considered this. It was, he admitted privately, not wrong. The docking process was tense in the specific way that situations were tense when everyone was scared but pretending to be operational. 4 Rebel soldiers met them at the hangar bay with weapons raised, faces doing the disciplined work of projecting authority over the fear underneath it. Saitama stepped off the ship first, which was not what Dreven had suggested, and held up both hands in the universal gesture that meant, "I understand this looks bad, but please don't make it worse." "I'm Saitama," he said. "I'm from a different galaxy. I'm not with the Empire. I pushed Darth Vader's lightsaber away with my finger this morning, and I didn't hurt him, which I want to be upfront about because it might come up. I'm looking for people who are trying to do something good, and your friend," he gestured back at Dreven, who was descending the ramp with the careful deliberateness of a man who wanted it noted he was not making any sudden movements, "said you might be those people." The 4 soldiers looked at each other. One of them touched his earpiece. "Commander, he's here, he's—" a pause. He introduced himself. Commander Odin met them in the briefing room, a cramped space with a holographic projector that flickered at one corner and chairs that had been repaired so many times they were more repair than original chair. She looked at Saitama the way she looked at everything, directly, assessing, without the performed intimidation that lesser commanders used as a substitute for actual evaluation. "You survived a direct engagement with Vader," she said. "He's very good," Saitama said, with the honest respect of one fighter acknowledging another. "I'd say probably the best I've seen here. His sword thing was impressive. He made a vague gesture that somehow communicated I'm a special case without requiring further elaboration. "Our scouts reported he withdrew without ordering an orbital strike," Odin said. "Vader doesn't withdraw." "I think he needed to think," Saitama said. "I understand that. I said something that might have hit a nerve." Odin's eyes sharpened slightly. "What did you say?" "I asked if there was anyone in the galaxy actually trying to do something good. Not for an organization, just actually trying." He paused. He didn't answer, but he didn't kill me either, which I figure means the question meant something. The briefing room was quiet for a moment with the weight of that observation. Rill, standing at the back, wrote something in his datapad. Drevin was leaning against the wall with the posture of a man attending an event he'd organized, but wasn't entirely sure was a good idea. Odin sat down across from Saitama and folded her hands on the table. "What do you want?" she asked. "Not in terms of what you'll offer us or what we can offer you. Just what do you want? In this galaxy?" Saitama thought about it with the genuine seriousness the question deserved, because it was the right question and she'd asked it the right way. "I want to help people who need it," he said finally. "That's not complicated. Back where I'm from, I spent a long time helping people but feeling nothing because nothing challenged me. I'm starting to think the challenge isn't the point. The helping is the point. I just forgot that for a while." He looked at his hands, ordinary-looking hands that could crack moons. "You have a war against something genuinely terrible. You're losing slowly. You need help. I can help." He looked up. "That's enough reason." Odin studied him for a long moment. She had recruited people her whole career, assessed them for usefulness, trustworthiness, the specific blend of conviction and practicality that kept people alive and fighting. She had a good instinct for the gap between what people said and what they were, the places where motivation leaked through the presentation. Saitama had no gap. What he said and what he was occupied exactly the same space, with no performance between them. It was, she thought, either the most trustworthy thing she'd ever encountered or the most dangerous. She decided it was both, and that on balance she'd take it. "There's an Imperial weapons depot on Sullust," she said, pulling up the holographic display. The flickering corner made the tactical map look like it was breathing. "They've been shipping something, we don't know what. Our intelligence was cut off 3 weeks ago when we lost an extraction team. We need to know what's in that depot before it ships out. Extraction, not demolition. We need the information." Saitama leaned forward to look at the map with the genuine focus of someone who had found a problem to solve. "How defended?" 400 stormtroopers, 2 AT-AT walkers on the perimeter. Internal security systems we have partial schematics for. She paused. "We've lost 2 teams trying to get close." Saitama nodded slowly. "I can get in. Getting the information out is harder. I'd need someone who knows what they're looking at once I'm inside." Odin glanced at Rill. The Mon Calamari intelligence officer looked up from his datapad. "I can do the extraction remotely if someone gets me a hardline connection to their system." "How long would you need once connected?" 8 minutes. "I can keep people occupied for 8 minutes, Saitama said, with the confidence of a man who had once held a collapsing skyscraper above a crowd for 40 minutes while waiting for evacuation to complete. 8 minutes was, by comparison, nothing. Drevin cleared his throat from the wall. "I can fly extraction." Everyone looked at him. He crossed his arms. "My contract on him is functionally worthless now that Vader didn't kill him, and the Imperial command will be reassessing the bounty anyway. The math on working for the Empire just changed." He said it practically, which was how Drevin said most things, but underneath the practicality was something else. the specific quality of a decision that was less about calculation and more about the fact that sitting in that cantina, Saitama had asked him a question he hadn't been able to stop thinking about since. "Doesn't it bother you?" The honest answer, the one he hadn't given, was, yes. Every day, in the specific way of things you've decided you can't change and therefore can't afford to feel. "Good," Odin said. She looked at the assembled group, the intelligence officer running on no sleep, the bounty hunter making a career change, and the bald man from another galaxy who had survived Darth Vader and apologized to him afterward. She had built operations out of less. "We move in 36 hours. Get some rest." Saitama found a bunk in the crew quarters and lay on it staring at the ceiling, which was metal and close, and hummed faintly with the vibration of the ship's life support systems. He could hear the sounds of the frigate around him, the movement of people, the distant clang of maintenance work, and voices in conversation he couldn't quite make out. The sounds of a small community surviving on the edge of something much larger than itself. It reminded him of his apartment building back in City Z, the neighbor's TV through the thin walls, the couple on the floor above. The sounds of ordinary life continuing under the general awareness that monsters could appear at any moment and someone would need to deal with them. He'd been that someone for 3 years. He'd thought it was supposed to feel like more than it did. He was starting to think that feeling like enough was the thing he hadn't understood yet. That the point wasn't the feeling at all. It was the people in the rooms around you, living their lives, because someone had made sure they could. He closed his eyes. For the first time since arriving in this galaxy, he slept without any particular wish to be somewhere else. Above the ship, the stars held their positions in the dark, indifferent and ancient, while somewhere in the distance an Imperial communications network was transmitting a flagged report upward through chains of command to an emperor who sat in a tower on a city planet and read of a man who had stopped Vader's blade with his forearm, and did not respond with alarm, but with the slow, cold interest of someone who had been waiting a very long time for a particular kind of piece to appear on the board. The Force moved in the space between stars, carrying whispers of something it did not yet have a name for. 36 hours to Sullust. Sullust was a volcanic world that looked like a warning. From orbit, it presented as a bruised Puplagra sphere wreathed in ash clouds, and the faint orange glow of lava fields bleeding through the atmosphere's lower layers. A planet that had been geologically angry for 1 billion years and showed no signs of resolving the dispute. The Imperial depot sat on the edge of the Nun settlement's industrial complex, half buried in the rock face like something the planet was slowly trying to swallow, its surface installations bristling with sensor arrays and tubelusk emplacements that swept the Ushgra sky in patient arcs. 400 stormtroopers, 2 AT-ATs. A security grid that Rill, studying his partial schematics on the frigate's cramped bridge, described as aggressively redundant, which was intelligence officer language for they really don't want anyone getting in here. Saitama looked at the depot schematics for approximately 90 seconds. "I go in the front," he said. Udin looked at him. "The front has the AT-ATs." "I know. Each one is 18 meters tall. The main guns can level a city block." "Right." A pause. "You're going in the front," she confirmed. "While you and Rill's team go in the maintenance access on the eastern face," Saitama said, pointing at the schematic. "I'll make sure everyone's looking at me." Druvan, studying the approach vectors on the nav system from the pilot's seat, made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but occupied the same general neighborhood. Udin studied Saitama for a moment with the evaluating stillness that was her default mode, and then nodded once, which from her carried the weight of a speech from someone else. "Don't destroy the main structure," she said. "We need the data inside intact." "I'll be careful." Your version of careful leveled a garrison. "I've been practicing," Saitama said, which was not reassuring in any conventional sense, but which he delivered with such transparent sincerity that Udden found herself believing it anyway. The approach to Sullust's surface was made in two craft. Druvan's Kummerk fighter carrying Saitama on a direct descent toward the depot's main entrance, and a smaller rebel shuttle running dark along the planet's eastern rock face, skimming the lava fields low enough that the heat signature was lost in the geological noise. Rill coordinated from the shuttle, his dud-up-ud live with the depot's partial schematics, voice calm in the way of someone who had made peace with the possibility of catastrophic failure as an occupational baseline. In the fighter, Saitama watched Sullust grow in the viewport. The volcanic landscape had a brutal beauty to it, rivers of orange fire cutting through black rock, ash clouds backlit from below, a world that was perpetually destroying and remaking itself with complete indifference to the structures of civilization clinging to its surface. He thought about what Udden had told him during the mission briefing the previous night, about what the depot might be shipping. The intelligence fragments were incomplete but consistent in their shape, components, and large quantities, moving through a distribution network that didn't match any known weapons program. Rill had cross-referenced what they had with captured Imperial logistics data from 6 months ago and come back with something that sat in the briefing room like a stone dropped in still water: mass production of force inhibitor technology. Devices that dampened force sensitivity in confined spaces. The Empire had been developing them for years for use in Inquisitor detention facilities, but the quantities suggested something larger, something designed not for cells and interrogation rooms, but for deployment at scale. Cities maybe, whole populations. The idea of technology designed to silence the force across an entire population had produced a specific quality of quiet in the briefing room, the quiet of people processing something that confirmed their worst understanding of what they were fighting against. Saitama had no personal relationship with the Force, felt it only as the occasional peculiar sensation of something vast moving in the space around him, the way you sense weather changing before you can see it. But he understood the principle. The Empire wanted to take something from people that those people didn't even know they had, to preemptively remove a capacity for resistance before resistance could organize. He understood that kind of enemy. He'd hit them in the face before. The first AT-AT pilot saw the fighter coming in on direct approach and flagged it as unusual. No Imperial transponder, wrong configuration for a civilian craft, descending on a trajectory that suggested either mechanical failure or deliberate intention. He reported it, received orders to engage, and brought the main guns to bear on a target that was still 3 kilometers out and closing fast. Druvan cut the engines at 2 kilometers, which was not standard procedure for any approach in the history of Imperial rebel engagements, and Saitama stepped out of the ship. In the atmosphere, at 2 kilometers altitude, he fell without concern, watching the depot grow below him with the calm attention of a man watching something he intends to interact with. At 1 kilometer, the AT-AT opened fire, the massive energy bolts tearing upward in overlapping patterns that lit the ash cloud underbelly orange and white, the kind of fire that erased things. Saitama moved through it the way he'd moved through Vudka's attacks, the way he moved through everything, with the reflexes of someone for whom the ceiling of physical response had been removed one grueling training session at a time, until what remained was something that the galaxy's existing vocabulary of combat had no adequate entry for. He landed in the main courtyard between the 2 AT-ATs. The impact crater was modest by his standards, 3 meters across, with clean edges. The dull plating of the courtyard buckled downward in a neat circle. He stood at the center of it and looked up at the nearest AT-AT as it began the slow mechanical process of redirecting its guns downward, which required more time than the designers had anticipated, because the designers had assumed any ground-level target would be attempting to flee. Saitama was not attempting to flee. He was standing in the courtyard looking at the AT-AT with the focused attention of someone who had been told very specifically not to destroy the main structure, and was calculating the precise application of force required to remove a problem without creating a larger one. He grabbed the AT-AT's forward leg. The machine was 18 meters tall and weighed, at Imperial specifications, a significant fraction of what a small building weighed. Saitama bent the leg at its joint with careful, deliberate pressure, the mechanical equivalent of folding a piece of paper, controlled, directional. And the AT-AT listed sideways and sat down heavily away from the depot's main structure, its hull intact, its crew shaken but alive, its capacity to aim its main guns at him permanently resolved. The second AT-AT was still reorienting. He walked toward it while stormtroopers poured from every entrance in the kind of coordinated response that indicated this garrison had drilled for perimeter breach. Blaster fire converged from 300 directions, the air between Saitama and the stormtrooper lines becoming briefly solid with energy bolts, a geometry of aimed light that covered every angle and left no corridor of approach untouched. He walked through it, not fast, deliberately, measuredly, at a pace that allowed the stormtroopers to see him walking through it. There was a strategic element to this that he'd learned from years of hero work. Sometimes the most important thing wasn't defeating the enemy efficiently. It was demonstrating, clearly and undeniably, that the fight was already over, so the enemy could make the decision to stop before more people got hurt. He'd learned this from a single incident 4 years ago when he demolished a villain's fortress in 3 seconds, and the villain's henchmen had kept fighting anyway, because no one had given them the chance to process that there was nothing left to fight for. He stopped in the center of the stormtrooper line and looked around at the surrounding soldiers. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said, conversationally, at a volume that carried. "I'm here for the data in your central records system. Someone's going to access it remotely in about 7 minutes. After that, I'll leave. Nobody has to get injured if nobody makes it necessary." The stormtroopers looked at each other, at their disabled AT-AT, at the man who had walked through 300 blaster bolts without breaking stride. A sergeant, operating on the training that said you held your position regardless, ordered the line to advance. Saitama exhaled. He moved through the formation quickly, not with punches, because punches at anything above his absolute minimum created medical consequences he was trying to avoid, but with the precise application of enough force to render each soldier temporarily non-functional without permanent injury. It was the most technically demanding thing he did, this careful calibration, the constant internal adjustment required to hit something hard enough to stop it without hitting it hard enough to break it. Back home, he'd gotten good at it over the years. Here, with beings in armor with different physiologies and material properties, he was recalibrating in real time. He was not perfect at it. One stormtrooper hit a wall harder than intended and would need 2 weeks of recovery. Saitama noted this with the specific self-critical awareness that he'd been applying to his own actions since arriving in this galaxy, cataloging the gap between intention and result, filing it against future attempts to do better. 4 minutes in, the courtyard was quiet. Rill's voice came through the comm in Saitama's ear, a device Drevin had provided from a spare kit, sized for a human and therefore slightly uncomfortable. "I'm in the Eastern Maintenance Corridor. 30 seconds to hardline access." "Courtyard's clear," Saitama said. "I'm holding the main entrance." "Stormtrooper response teams will be moving from the interior barracks. 2 minutes, maybe less." "That's fine." A pause. "There are 80 soldiers in the interior barracks." "Still fine." Rill made a sound that was part skepticism, part reluctant acceptance of a reality that kept demonstrating itself. "Connection established. 8 minutes on my mark." A beat. "Mark." Saitama sat down on the edge of the courtyard crater, watching the main doors. They opened 40 seconds later, and the interior response team came through in good order. These were the garrison's veterans, better equipped, moving with the practiced coordination of soldiers who'd done this before. They took one look at the courtyard, the disabled AT-AT, the 400 unconscious colleagues, the bald man sitting on the rim of a crater eating what appeared to be a ration bar he'd found somewhere, and stopped. 8 minutes, Saitama said, holding up the ration bar in a vaguely explanatory gesture. Then I'm gone, your call. The response team's senior officer held the position, did not advance, did not retreat, stood in the doorway with the rigid stance of someone maintaining a posture of authority in a situation that had comprehensively stripped authority of its usual props. Saitama respected the discipline. He sat and waited and ate the ration bar, which was slightly better than the last one, and watched the ash clouds move across Sullust's sky in slow volcanic thermals. On the eastern face, Rill's fingers moved across an Imperial terminal with the precise urgency of a man who had trained for exactly this, and had no intention of wasting the extraordinary circumstances that had created his opportunity. The data assembled itself in fragments, shipping manifests, component lists, distribution coordinates, and what it assembled into was worse than the intelligence fragments had suggested and better than the worst case had feared, which in rebel terms meant actionable. Terrible, but actionable. Done, Rill said, 5 seconds ahead of schedule. Extracting. Saitama stood up, brushed ration bar crumbs from his suit, and nodded to the response team officer in a gesture of genuine respect. You made a good call, he said. The officer didn't respond, but something in the rigid posture shifted fractionally, the microscopic acknowledgement of someone who has been treated as a person in a context that usually doesn't allow for it. He walked to the perimeter, leaped to Dreven's waiting ship at altitude with a jump that left a small crater where he'd launched from, and they were in hyperspace before the garrison's emergency communications reached the nearest Imperial outpost. In the shuttle, Rill sat with his datapad and the weight of what was on it. Odin leaned over his shoulder, reading. Her face did the stillness thing, but underneath it, something moved, not fear, which she'd processed years ago into a form of fuel, but the specific gravity of confirmed knowledge, the moment when a suspicion becomes a fact, and you have to decide what to do with it. The Force Inhibitor program was larger than anyone had estimated. The deployment timeline was months away, not years, and the distribution network pointed, through 3 layers of Imperial logistics obfuscation, toward a list of target systems, not military installations, not rebel strongholds, but civilian population centers with documented histories of resistance sympathy. Thousands of worlds. Odin straightened, looked at Saitama, who was watching her from across the shuttle with the patient attention of someone waiting to understand what came next. How much did Dreven tell you about what we were looking for? She asked. Enough, Saitama said. Something that takes away people's ability to resist. Yes, she looked at the datapad, at the list of worlds. They're going to silence the Force across civilian populations, remove Force sensitivity before the next generation can develop it. Make sure there's never another Jedi, never another organized Force-based resistance ever again. She said it steadily because that was the only way she knew how to say things that needed saying. It's not just a weapon, it's an end. Saitama was quiet for a moment. Outside the viewport, hyperspace did its luminous streaming thing, beautiful and indifferent. How many people does the rebellion have? He asked. Not enough, Odin said, which was what she always said because it was always true. Is there anyone else? Other factions, people who'd care about this specifically? Odin and Rill exchanged a look. Rill pulled up a secondary display, a map of the galaxy with points of light marking independent systems, neutral factions, and unaffiliated Force-sensitive communities that existed in the spaces between Empire and Rebellion. The Mandalorians, remnant Jedi in hiding. Criminal syndicates have their own reasons to resist Imperial expansion into their territory. A dozen smaller groups that the rebellion had never successfully unified, because the work of unification was slower and harder than the work of survival. There's a contact, Rill said carefully. Someone who operates between factions, brokered 2 previous intelligence exchanges between rebel cells and Mandalorian clans. If anyone could get this information to the right people simultaneously. Set it up, Odin said. She looked at Saitama. You'd need to be part of that meeting. They'll want to see proof of the intelligence, and they'll want to see you. Why me specifically? Because word travels fast in this galaxy, Drevin said from the pilot's seat, without turning around. By now, every faction that matters has heard about Tatooine, about Vader. They'll want to know which side you're on before they trust anything you're attached to. Saitama considered this. The familiar weight of it, of being the variable that everyone needed to categorize before they could move forward, the unknown quantity that systems of power couldn't process until they'd put a label on it. He'd spent 3 years as a hero being defined by his power rather than his choices, fitted into a ranking system that measured him by his ceiling rather than his direction. I'm not on a side, he said. I'm on the side of the people who'd have their futures taken from them. He nodded at Rill's map at the list of civilian worlds. Set up the meeting. Outside, the stars streamed. Somewhere in the galaxy, an emperor received a Sullust incident report and added it to his calculations with the cold patience of someone playing a game whose board extended further than anyone else could see. And somewhere in the Force, in the place between places where the living energy of the galaxy moved and whispered and sometimes, rarely, sang, something stirred that had been still for a long time. Not a prophecy, not a vision. Just the Force, recognizing something it had no category for, and deciding, in its ancient and imperfect way, to pay attention. Saitama closed his eyes and listened to the hyperspace hum and thought about the list of worlds and felt, for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, that there was something ahead of him that was genuinely worth walking toward. The problem wouldn't be solved with one punch. That, he was beginning to understand, was exactly the point.